franchise for CBS. Now, give us the backstory here leading into the debut of season 1. We just saw the trailer for season 2, which launches next Thursday, January 17th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 Pacific, on CBS All Access. So when this was launching on CBS All Access in the fall of 2017, there was a lot of pressure on you, right? Because this wasn't just the next installment or pre-installment, let's say, of the Star Trek franchise, which is loved all over the world. This was, you were carrying the CBS All Access service, a new business model. So there was, tell us a little bit about what that was like and how did you deal with it?
Well, there was, good morning everybody, nice to see you. There was a lot of pressure on doing another Star Trek show, on the idea of doing another Star Trek show, and they came to us a while ago, and I didn't feel, and by a while ago I mean maybe 5 years ago, I didn't feel entirely ready, mostly because I didn't really know what to do with it yet. And I think that what scared me the most was to have an initiative forced into existence, something that wasn't ready to be birthed. And I said, I would love to do this, of course I would love to do this, but just give me a little bit of time to work through how.
And the concept from the get-go was this was about 10 years before the original Star Trek story begins.
Not really. That's part of the problem was I couldn't have pitched it to you that way.
Okay.
Yet. And I was looking for the right partner to figure out what to do, and sat down with Brian Fuller, whose work I deeply, deeply admire. And he showed me a picture of himself wearing a Star Trek uniform when he was 12 or 13 years old, and expressed his deep, deep love for Trek, and he was clearly the guy to partner with. And when we started speaking about it, I think a couple instincts started to emerge very clearly. One was it'd be interesting to look at that time frame. One was we really want to do a show about a woman of color as the lead.
And what was that?
Because it was time, and because I think the greatest conversation that Gene Roddenberry contributed to the issue of diversity is that it was never a conversation. It was an assumption.
So when did you cast Sonequa Martin Green? And I assume her history with Walking Dead played a part in that because she was known to the fan universe.
Yes, it did and it didn't play a part. It was great, obviously it was really helpful, but what you're really looking for when somebody walks in the door is not necessarily what they're doing when they're reading the lines, although in Sonequa's case, she could literally read anything and it would be incredible.
Read the phone book.
The phone book, anything. But she had this incredible spirit she walked into the room with, and it was really clear that that was somebody I connected to and that I knew audiences would connect to.
Okay. So in putting this together, I mean, the idea was that this would be a TV show on TV, not necessarily on a streaming service.
The idea was never to really consider it as a network show. We just didn't know where it was going to be housed. And then one day, after a couple people had come to us before the All Access part of it went and said we really want to do it, and we were in conversations with some people. And then the corporate decision was made to do it as the launch of All Access, which was terrifying. But also, it was already so, the enormity of the task at hand was already so big that it was like, all right, well, let's just go with it.
What was your biggest concern? Was it that the fans would revolt and not accept it or something?
In terms of the streaming part, or just Trek in general?
In Trek in general, but this, you got to buy CBS All Access in order to watch it, although it's on Netflix and the rest of the world.
Right, so there's always concern that the fans will revolt, and that's a constant fear that anybody who's doing Trek should have. I think it's healthy, I think it's right. As far as the idea of it being on All Access, I think what was really clear was if we're going to ask people to pay $10 to watch a commercial-free version of it, or even $5 to watch the commercial version of it, then we have to deliver them an experience that they cannot get on regular television. They have to come out of that feeling it's worth the money. And what I always said to everybody was nobody complains about paying for Game of Thrones. So we have to do the same.
Or they pirate it.
Or they pirate it, but Star Trek's one of the most pirated shows out there, unfortunately. And in a weird way, that's almost a compliment, even though I don't like it. But it does mean people are watching it.
Okay. Now, does the dynamic change because it is on this over-the-top OTT platform with the fans? I mean, do you get different kinds of feedback? Do you get more global feedback?
There's definitely, initially, it's less now. There was, why am I paying for Star Trek? It was always free. And we knew we had to address that in a real way. But at a certain point, they're either going to buy it or they're not going to buy it. And I can't think about that. What I have to think about is, how do I make the show great?
Okay. Did you try to push the creative boundaries in order to make this a must-see show for not just Star Trek fans, but for anybody in the genre? I mean, because this wasn't on broadcast TV, you were able to do things like drop the first F-bomb in a Star Trek TV show.
Yeah.
There was some fleeting Klingon nudity. Tell us about the creative decisions there.
You know, it's all tone. In case of dropping Tilly uses the F word. It's fuck, by the way. We were like, all right, let's not do this in a way that feels like it's disrespectful of Trek. Let's do this in a way that is actually kind of wonderful. And it comes from Tilly's exuberance over science. And if anyone's ever going to use the F word in Star Trek, it's going to be for that reason. And so that felt very appropriate.
It's for science.
It's for science. Sorry, the first part of your question. Yes. Yeah. So I think that the line now between movies and television is essentially over. And certainly the way the media is consuming it, it's essentially gone. And so, especially if we're asking people to pay, our mandate together has been, we are going to deliver you a movie on television. It's just going to be 13, 14, 15 hours long. And the thing that, having traveled in the movie world and having traveled in the feature world, the television world, the thing that I love about television is that you can spend real time getting into the nuances and the smaller details of characters' lives and arcs that you just don't have time for in 2 hours. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity. It's a wonderful gift. So when you watch the show, you'll go, wow, those are some massive sequences. But the key, and it's what all the writers and we're all constantly striving for, is to make sure that we're not losing the small intimacy and that the big isn't overshadowing the little.
Okay. Now, we're awash in data, but you don't really use data, you say, to inform the creative arc of Star Trek Discovery.
No, I'll use it. It's not that I won't use it. I'll use it. I just have to contextualize it.
How do you use it? And what do you look for?
Well, let's start with the fans, okay? So, very vocal fan base, and it took me a while to understand that the debate, that some people who love it and some people who hate it, is actually one of the great gifts of Star Trek. That if you try and please everybody, you're going to please nobody. And that debate is healthy and democratic and wonderful. And so, if somebody doesn't like something and writes about it, or writes about it with consistency, if I see that message echoing in other people, then I'll say, okay, what feels resonant for me? And what lessons do I take in how we're going to make our next steps?
So what were the controversies that really had fans most passionate about from season 1, and then how did you take that, and you're the showrunner officially for season 2, how did you apply that to the upcoming season?
Well, I think there was initial reaction to, and it wasn't necessarily bad, it was just it was an expected adjustment period to the darker tone of how we introduced the story. So season 1 was all about war, and in a time of war there's darkness, there's urgency, there's a lot of things that Trek hadn't quite done the way we did them, and that's why we did them. And at the core of Star Trek, people will often ask me, what defines Star Trek for you? And to me, it's an essential vision of optimism. That is the beauty of what Roddenberry did. Is that in the future, our best selves are going to emerge. The best of us are going to emerge. And that's a message that's become a mission for us now more than ever, because I think people really need it. And as long
because of the political climate, the economic climate?
Because the political climate, the economic climate, life is very hard and painful for a lot of people. And television is the great respite. It's the place you come to either decompress or to go somewhere else or to disappear into a moment that takes you outside of your life. It doesn't have to remove you from your existence. It can actually reflect it in a beautiful way. But what I wanted to make sure was that people felt that no matter how dark we went, they would understand that we were traveling through the Valley of Shadow to get to the light at the end, and we were restoring the message of Trek. And you'll see in season 2, it's in many ways a much lighter season. There's still darkness and a lot of drama and a lot of challenge, but we're not let in with the stakes of daily war, and therefore people can be a little lighter.
Okay. Now, given that we are, let's just go on. You've also been tapped for 4 additional shows for CBS All Access in the Star Trek universe.
Yes.
Is that what it is?
So, CBS All Access is our main and fundamental home.
Okay.
I think with things like animation, the question is whether Lower Decks made a lot of sense because it is in many ways kind of a more adult show.
Lower Decks is.
Lower Decks is so. The showrunner of Rick and Morty, Mike McMahon, came to me and said, "I want to do a show about the people in the lower decks of a spaceship whose job is to take the yellow cartridge, put it in the processor, and make sure the banana comes out the other side." And I said, "You can stop pitching because that's perfect." And it's not that we're doing Rick and Morty in the world of Star Trek, although if you watch Rick and Morty, you'll see that it's deeply influenced by Star Trek, which is really wonderful. It's just a very different tone. The key is to laugh with Star Trek, not at Star Trek. And it'll skew slightly more adult.
So whether that goes on CBS All Access, that's a future decision.
No, that is going on
that's
CBS All Access. But there are going to be other animated shows.
Okay.
And the question is, where are they going to be best suited?
Okay.
Because they're probably going to be for a younger audience.
Now, for fans, it's exciting news. Patrick Stewart is coming back for a series. Tell us what that is and why that's significant. How did you get him back to Star Trek?
He's just so incredibly... sometimes you meet your heroes and they're as wonderful as you want them to be. And that's absolutely the case with Patrick. And, you know, we had heard that he was very reticent for a million understandable reasons to do it. And was, you know...
What was the big sticking point?
I think he just felt like, I don't know what else to do. People loved it so much. It's been so long.
He doesn't know what to do with it.
And most fundamentally, I don't want to do what I already did. Why come back to that? Which doesn't mean negate what I already did. It just means I would like to bring something new to the table. Until I know what that new thing is, why do it at all?
So how did you convince him that there was a new thing?
We sat down. We had worked out an idea. We proposed it to him. He sat there listening very thoughtfully, as he does, and said, "Thank you. Let me think about it." And he left the room, and we thought we failed. And we were like, okay, look, we took our best shot. It was Patrick Stewart. We got to spend the time with him. That was pretty cool. And, you know, that'll be a great story one day. And then on Monday, his agent called and said, he's interested, but he would like to know more. And can you write down what you had? And in that first meeting, that was really where Patrick threw down the gauntlet and said, if I were ever to do this again, I need to have a brand new reason to do it. And I want to defy people's expectations. Because there are so many expectations with the next generation and what it would be now. And it was a wonderful challenge. So I sat down at that point with Kirsten Beyer, Akiva Goldsman, and Michael Chabon. And we were like, okay, let's write a 4-page treatment. He just wants 4 pages. We started writing, and it ended up being 34 pages. And we looked at it and we were like, we can't cut it down. This is the expression of what it is. And we're gonna try and give him our best shot. And if he doesn't like it, he doesn't like it again. And it was the weekend of the Oscars, and he said, let's meet we had another meeting.
The Oscars or the
Oscars last year.
Oh, I see.
It was the weekend of the Oscars. He was in town for. He said, let's meet, and we sat down. He walked in the room with a big smile.
Okay. And apparently the central plot point here is that Picard's life was deeply affected by the dissolution of the Romulan Empire.
That's correct.
Is that what it is? Okay. So this show is entering pre-production?
Yeah, oh yeah.
When are we going to see it? What's it called?
We don't have a name for it yet.
Okay.
I'd love to give you just title. There's a lot of conversation about that right now.
Well, what's it about?
Captain Picard.
Okay. Anything more than that?
No.
How about just calling it Captain Picard? I shouldn't do that.
We will take that into consideration. It's a good idea.
All right, touching again on season 2 coming up, what can you tell us without giving any spoilers? You mentioned, I mean, you're still investing a lot in CGI, VFX. That's a big part of the show. Fans are expecting that now. Was there, any special consideration or urgency in creating big set pieces or things like this that would, delight fans and cause conversations?
Sure. So again, yes, there's a tremendous amount of time and effort and frankly love put into all the CG work on the show. That is not where we start. The CG work on the show is there to support the emotional story, period. I'm sure you've all had experiences, watching movies that are big CGI fests, and you kind of go like, I'm tuning out at a certain point. And I think that, for me, what was so exciting about season 2, we set up a mystery in season 1. How come Spock, one of the most beloved characters in all of Star Trek history, let alone in the world and the universe, has never mentioned his absence from Michael Burnham? It was a big mystery. And I think I knew inherently that the answer to that question was not going to be 1 or 2 episodes. It was going to be a full season, and you were going to really have to dive deep into that story, into that relationship, into what happened between them, and there's a lot of friction between them.
So that's a pivotal storyline.
It was really, for me, the storyline of season 2. And they work out their relationship against the backdrop of a larger mystery, and it turns out that if they don't fix their relationship, they're not going to solve the mystery. And that actually was a wonderful thing to do. So it is, for me, a story of this bridge crew family that's finally become a family, because season 1 was really about coming together as a family. And season 2 is now about the family working together to solve this mystery, the literal and figurative families. And ultimately, the story challenges the family with whether or not it's going to be able to stay together.
Okay. Given we're at CES, let me ask you, how have the technology of today and in the next 5 years or whatever, how has that inspired creative decisions on the show in terms of, there's a lot of alternate universe stuff, which is really very sci-fi and not today. But are there things about the way we use technology today that find its way into the show?
Well, fortunately, it's a show about technology, so we have great fun with it. And in the writers' room, there's a lot of invention of, okay, let's be futurists, let's play. What would we want to see? What can we imagine? Star Trek is 1 inch from magic all the time anyway, in terms of what the science is doing. And so I think that I love the idea of figuring out how to tell stories about the intersection between character and technology, and how will it potentially hurt us in the future, how will it potentially help us in the future, what will it enable us as a species to do and become, because that's ultimately the question of what Star Trek, that's the question of Star Trek anyway, but I think technology is certainly not something to shy away from. I love how much the world is changing day to day. I actually think it's really exciting, and the speed that it's changing with, and for us it's just get on the roller coaster and ride it and figure out how to constantly iterate into new versions of storytelling. And so that applies to things like, okay, we can do our hour-long television show, but we can also do the short treks, which were these 12 to 15-minute experiments that we did this year on All Access, which was another form of technology and another form of storytelling in a new context. We would not have been able to do something like that on a network.
And those were sort of side...
So each story was designed to be an individual story that if you watch it in and of itself, you're going to have a really satisfying experience, but when you watch season 2 of Discovery, you'll see how they connect.
Provide some more backstory.
Yes, it makes it a bigger story.
Okay. So, you are a streaming platform. There are theoretically no constraints on length or commercial break, but you do have to take in the ad break. Which you find a useful creative...
I like it, actually. An act break is really there to keep you hooked. You have the act, it reaches its crescendo, it leaves you on a suspended note. You watch your Ford commercial, you go to the fridge, whatever you call it, and you go back. Unless you pay, and I hope you do pay $10. It's not a lot. $10, but either way, dramatically, it allows you to have peaks and valleys to your structure, and that is the value of an act break, which is obviously very much a network convention, but I think very helpful.
And you had to design the show for a global audience. That was
Sure.
that was spec'd out at the
To
beginning.
be fair, I can take no credit for that. It was designed as a show for a global audience before television was for a global audience. So I think time just caught up to Star Trek.
Okay. And so, but you lead with visual storytelling, so that you could watch it on mute and
Yes.
and experience the show
Well,
as you intended.
it's very interesting. Having now traveled the world and watched audiences watch some of the movies that we've made in different languages, what you begin to realize is that a picture does literally speak 1,000 words, and that if you can't tell the story visually and people don't get it, then something's missing. If it's just that, there's nothing I love more than focusing on dialogue. So let me just topic sentence that. I love great dialogue. I love listening to it. I love writing it when I can hopefully make it great. But the reality is that in another country, in another language, the nuances of the American language will not translate. It just will not. And so the story itself has to be felt in other ways. And that's something we're constantly working on, which is why, again, the blurring of the line between movies and television is so exciting. Because I want someone in a country who doesn't speak my language to feel what I feel about that show, about that story, without having to necessarily speak my language.
Okay. Now, you mentioned tracking fan reaction. Are people tweeting at you, or where do you go to get this sort of temperature read?
I'll look at a lot of the articles. I have to. It's taken me 20 years to be able to look at the articles. It's taken me 20 years to understand how to, and to not want to never go on the internet again after looking at them. And I think it's because the internet has now become a voice for absolutely everybody,
right.
And that is a wonderful thing in many ways, and it's a very challenging thing in other ways. But again, I have to go back to, what resonates? What feels truthful and authentic about the messaging? So I will read as many articles about Star Trek that are written as I can. Fortunately, there have been quite a few. And I'll look for the common denominators, and I'll see what speaks to me.
Okay. And again, what kind of feedback did you apply to season 2?
So there was a lot of, we were already going in the direction of saying, let's lighten the show more, because now we're not in a time of war.
It's not serious.
Right, so it is very serious, but there's a lot more humor in it.
Okay.
And so that was definitely something that I saw. And this is funny, but it's one of the great examples of Trek. There was so much debate about the hair, the Klingon hair. And how come the Klingons don't have hair? Why did you redesign the Klingons? And your life is over. And we had actually, Glenn Hedrick, who does our prosthetics, and he's a brilliant, brilliant guy, and Neville Page worked together to come up with this idea that in a time of war, the Klingons all shave their body hair. It's a version of sort of saying we're now committing to war, and that was the logic for them not having hair. And really through an era of omission, we realized we hadn't actually made that explicitly clear in any context. So people were very like, why don't this is not the Klingons? And in season 2, we were like, well, let's tell them why. And so we explained that it was because it was a time of war.
Now, and then just going back to the data question, you didn't actually focus test anything out of this, right? I mean, you didn't go to the level of like, oh, they hated this moment, or they loved this moment, like a heartbeat monitor, nothing like that.
No.
That's not useful for you?
It's not that it's not useful. It's that in the case of Star Trek, here's the thing. When you put something out online, right, a section of the internet is designed to spoil, right? Spoiler alert is a thing, it's real, and it is aggressive, and it is a virus. And when you're making something like Star Trek, there are people who quite literally will pay to see the material and review it early before people actually get the chance of having the experience to have joy or have their own opinion about something. And so in the case of Trek, because there was not only the noise of how is the show going to be, but also will it carry a new streaming service, we're like, why are we going to expose ourselves to that kind of input before people actually get a chance to, and there had been, Brian Fuller, who again, I have the deepest admiration for, left, and there was a lot of articles about the shakeup, and so everyone was poised with their pens to write those articles. And we thought, okay, please evaluate the show on its merits. Everyone has worked so hard and given so much love to this thing. This thing is being born of love. please give it a chance. And so, to my great delight, when the reviews came in and were really positive, I was very happy we withheld. That was not the case on season 2. On season 2 it was, okay, now you know what the show is, we want you to get information as early as possible, we want to set the tone as early as possible, and so we did. So we started telling people,
set expectations.
6 to 7 months ago, just to set expectations. Everybody knows about Spock and Burnham, everybody knows what's coming, so.
All right, and then just last question because we've got to wrap up, but what is the size of the fan base here? I mean, is that something you track? I mean, is it expanding? Is it flat?
No, I think it's large and expanding actually, and that's part of why we all felt that it was an opportunity to expand the Star Trek universe, because Trek has been defined traditionally by a somewhat narrow point of view, and that point of view isn't wrong. It's wonderful. It's what I love about Star Trek, but I think Trek can be so much more. And so the idea that we can retain the essential optimism of Star Trek, but begin to tell stories in different ways about characters who you haven't necessarily seen before, in areas of the galaxy you haven't necessarily seen before, is really, really exciting. And so my hope is that through the different shows that we're doing now, and the idea really being that each show has to be a totally unique prospect. You can't get from Discovery what you're going to get from Picard, or Lower Deck. Each one has to be different.
Is it called Picard?
No, I'm just calling it Picard, just for reference. But that was a neat trick that time. But
Picard 2.0.
Picard 2.0. That's great. Let's do that. Picard 2.0. We'll call it that. The idea was that each one has to be unique and specific, and when you look at what Marvel has done with television, for example, nobody complains about too many Marvel shows, right? Each show is different, and so
some people may complain, but
well, of course,
So
some people will, of course, but I don't think Marvel has any plans to do less shows.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that what do you put the highest premium on? Great storytelling. If each show is told well and each show feels different enough, then why can't there be more of them? That's not to say we should just throw them all out there and do a bunch of random Star Trek shows. Each one needs to be unique.
Very good. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.